Hello and welcome to this webinar today on agri-environment schemes and the future and how best to get the best for your business. My name is Richard Clark. I work for the National Association for Areas of Outstanding Natural Beauty. We are really pleased to be able to deliver this webinar today. And it's thanks to help from my colleagues in AONBs and national parks, in DEFRA and the RPA that we have this webinar going on. The National Association is a small charity that promotes the interests of AONB partnerships and teams across England, Wales and Northern Ireland. We work closely with national parks in England and Wales, and hence today this webinar has been arranged to engage with the farming communities in both areas of outstanding natural beauty and national parks. The objective of this webinar is to provide farmers in AONBs and national parks with practical, relevant information around future opportunities that may be available in protected landscapes. We also hope to make stronger links between farming communities in protected landscapes and the staff working for AONBs and national parks. Staff in AONBs and national parks would like their farming communities to see them as a first point of contact and a source of accurate information around future agri-environment schemes. Since October, the National Association has been supported by DEFRA to promote the importance of farming in protected landscapes. Between November and December, we ran technical webinars for staff in protected landscapes to become more conversant with what was happening to agricultural support across England. Following those technical webinars, it was agreed that individual AONBs and national park teams would make contact with their farmers, those that they're already working with and those that they have not started to work with, to discuss how they can work together in the future. It was also agreed that the National Association would run national webinars in the new year. Today is the first webinar we have been able to run. We apologise to those that may have booked on earlier webinars because we had to cancel them. Simply, we cancelled them because we didn't have any new information to share with you, and we didn't really want to waste your time. We know how busy you are. I'm pleased to say that for today's webinar, we have representatives from DEFRA who are going to speak about farming in protected landscapes, and representative from RPA that's going to talk about the new countryside stewardship scheme that is now open for application. We have staff and farmers that work in protected landscapes to talk about the practical experiences of working with countryside stewardship. We have, I think, nearly 500 people on this webinar, so the chat function has to be disabled. However, we will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box at the center bottom of your screen. Because we've nearly got 500 people, I think it will be very difficult to answer all the questions that we will receive today. So we will be managing and trying to answer as many of those that we can. Those that we can't answer today, we will record and collate and try and find answers for you, pass them on to the most appropriate people to try and answer them. That's the introduction. I'm now pleased to ask Sarah Hardy, who is one of the joint heads of landscape access and people at DEFRA, to talk about farming in protected landscapes. A short introduction, I think. Sarah, if you could open your camera and unmute yourself.
Hi, Richard. Yes, hopefully, can you hear me?
Perfectly, thank you.
Great. So hi, everybody. Yes, as Richard has said, my name is Sarah Hardy, and I'm one of the heads of the Landscape Access and People team within DEFRA. And so one of the key initiatives that we will be taking forward over the next 3 years is a specific programme on farming in protected landscapes. So as set out in the Agricultural Transition Plan, we're committed to delivering this programme over the next 3 years, and it will be starting later this year. The programme will build upon existing infrastructure and partnerships within the national parks and the AONBs to support farmers and land managers during the agricultural transition to deliver, hopefully, bigger and better outcomes for both the environment, for people, and for the place that you're living. So people will be able to apply for the funding through this programme via their national parks and the AONBs, and we are developing the programme at the moment with a core group of stakeholders, which includes Protected Landscapes representatives, Natural England, RPA and DEFRA, and we're also consulting with a range of stakeholders, including the NFU. But you may be thinking, well, why have we got this special fund for protected landscapes? I'm not aware of anything else happening in other parts of the country, and that's absolutely right. The reason is because we think the protected landscapes are extremely special and they're unique and they need to be protected while supporting a good living for farmers and the communities who work within them and the wider local economy. But we need protected landscapes because of their uniqueness and specialness to be doing more. They need to be doing more for nature, taking a key role in delivering our 30 by 30 commitment. The protected landscapes make up 26% of the 30 by 30 commitment, so there'll be a large contribution. More for climate, delivering on net zero particularly, but then more for people, for the people who are visiting them, which I'm sure you've all experienced more recently due to the pandemic and the number of visitors that you're receiving across the protected landscapes. We need to be able to support those higher visitor numbers. We need to create a place that drives excellence and green innovation. And then also we need to be able to help you be supported during the agricultural transition so that you can continue to undertake all of the farming activities whilst having the other pressures that you tend to experience, being both part of a protected landscape, but also, you know, just generally with your business as a whole. So we think that the Farming and Protected Landscape Fund will help to put you on a better footing to allow you to achieve some of these objectives. So you are in a unique position to deliver on them. Farmers and land managers living in these areas know the opportunities and challenges facing your landscapes and the communities best. And you can work closely with your protected landscape to be able to work up specific projects that can deliver our aims and objectives. The programme will take a bottom-up approach. I know that many of you will be aware of the Conservative Manifesto commitment to take all that states that the people know best and pledge to give towns, cities and communities of all sizes real power and real investment to drive growth in the future. So this money is also there to help with that. The money will also help us to be able to see how the protected landscapes can deliver on those objectives that I'd stated at the beginning together as a whole, and that's particularly thinking about things like the 30 by 30 commitment and how across all of the areas, when you come together as one, you can deliver significantly on these unique commitments. And then finally, the programme will hopefully look to address key challenges that you have all faced today, including the environmental degradation, how to manage that, but particularly the higher numbers of people that you will have seen across your protected landscapes in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is completely unique to your areas. And so you will need, hopefully this money will be able to support infrastructure that you may need across your farms, and that might mean parking, paths, new fences, anything that will help to support you in helping to manage the people around you. So then in terms of our next steps, so guidance on eligibility, the application process and assessments is going to be shared with the Protected Landscape Organisation shortly, and then we'll be able to send it out to the farming community. And we are planning to put out some further information on the programme in early April. So in a couple of weeks, fingers crossed, if we can get all the government timelines all sorted and aligned. Richard, that was everything that I wanted to say.
Thanks, Sarah. That's really helpful, and it's starting to really put meat on the bones. And we look forward to farming in protected landscapes being really successful over the next 3 years. Thank you, Sarah. It's now I have pleasure in welcoming Simon Lunnis, Head of Stakeholder Engagement at the Rural Payments Agency, to talk to us about Countryside Stewardship Scheme that has recently opened for application and some of the changes. Simon, welcome, and we look forward to hear from you. Sarah, if you could turn off your camera as well, that'd be really helpful. Thank you. All over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Chairman. It's always that horrible moment when I wrestle with the screen, but hopefully you can all see the slide deck now. First of all,
not yet, Simon. We're not getting. Oh, it's not coming, I'm afraid.
Okay.
If you'd like me to do it at this end, just say.
Just have one more try, shall we? Any joy? Is that?
No, it isn't. Shall I see if I can do it from here?
Okay, if you could do that, that'd be great.
Okay, so
Okay, all right. Well, apologies for that. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to be involved with your meeting here this afternoon. My brief is to provide an update on what's going on with Countryside Stewardship. In doing that, I want to set that very much in the context of sort of the wider development of government agricultural policy, because I think in that way it becomes clearer what's at stake, and also why you should be looking at opportunities like Countryside Stewardship and other agri-environment schemes on your farms, which I'm absolutely convinced most of you are doing already. I'm also going to say a little bit about the sustainable farming incentive as well, with sort of the first element of environmental land management, which is also kicking off this year. Thank you, Anna. Can I have next slide, please? Thank you. So just to start really with, what is the story of 2021? We're now in a situation where virtually all UK agricultural schemes are now operating under national legislation. That's given us the opportunity to simplify delivery of the schemes, particularly BPS and CS, and also to try and change the approach we have towards policing and penalties, and particularly to get away from some of the more kind of punitive elements of the EU CS scheme that we've been living with for a number of years. One point to note there, the opportunity because CS is a multi-annual scheme and ES, multi-annual schemes, we can begin to roll out these simplifications and changes for new schemes that are starting in 2021 under national legislation. The schemes which have already started under European rules, or sorry, agreements which have already started under European rules, unfortunately will have to roll through their life under those rules. Also this year we have reworked a number of the capital options which are available under Countryside Stewardship and I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. 2021 is also the first year of the Agricultural Transition Plan implementation. The phased reduction in BPS payments is beginning this year. We will see a consultation a bit later in the spring on some of the transition mechanisms associated with BPS, particularly the opportunity for people to take a lump sum payment rather more than a continuing stream of BPS payments, and also delinking of the scheme from the requirement to hold land and entitlements from 2024 onwards. And then finally, as I've already said, the Sustainable Farming Incentive pilot scheme has also been launched this year, and I'll say a little bit about that as well. Thank you, Anna. Just to begin though, with a few comments on the Agricultural Transition Plan. This table is lifted straight from the document that the government, that DEFRA published in November. What it shows is the profile of agricultural expenditure over the life of the present government up to 2024-25. What you'll see there, overall expenditure is stable. Government's committed to carry on spending just under £2.5 billion a year on agricultural support. But within that, there is a huge shift in emphasis. And you can see that at the moment, the blue box, we're spending just under 70% of all that money on direct payments. By 2024-25, that will have shifted, so we'll be spending less than half of that amount. And over that same period, the amount which is spent on supporting environmental and animal welfare outcomes, very largely the agri-environment schemes we're talking about here today, will double from currently about 23% of total spend to 57%. I mean, obviously, you'll appreciate the background to this already, but there are big push and pull factors driving these changes. In terms of push, I mean, the government has, really through successive rounds of CAP reform in Brussels, always argued that paying people an area payment simply based on the occupation of land didn't achieve any wider benefit, and wanted to move away from doing that. At the same time, there's tremendous pull factors. The public benefits that you're already delivering on your farms in terms of mitigating climate change, protecting soil, air and water, and improving habitat and opportunities for wildlife and just general amenity. All those, the delivery of all of those public benefits, the importance of that is just rising up the agenda all the time. It's becoming more and more critical for all of us, and that's why government wants to target policy and schemes much more in terms of paying directly for provision of public goods. Next slide, please, Anna. Thank you. This next slide says the same thing in a different way. It really just looks at the impact on BPS payments over the period up to 2025, and you can see that for this year there will be the first round of progressive cuts. The first £30,000 that you're earning from BP or you're paid through BPS, you're going to have that reduced by 5%. The next 20,000 between 30,000 and 50,000 be reduced by 10%, and then between 50,000 and 150,000, 20%, and so on. The bands work in the same way, as very similar to income tax. But the point being that this year, everyone will see at least a 5% reduction in BPS payments. If you're earning larger BPS payments, that's going to be closer to 10%. And you can see by the time we progressed to 2024, that figure is going to rise to a cut of at least 50% and probably closer to 60% for people getting larger payments. So there is both the incentive and the kind of imperative there to really get involved in agri-environment schemes and look at ways that you can get paid for the public benefits, the public goods that you're delivering on your farms, and to make good some of the loss in income you're going to get from the removal of these direct support payments. Next slide, please, Anna. Thank you. So just begin to talk about the changes which are happening this year. We are taking a new approach to the delivery of countryside stewardship from 2021 onwards. Particularly, we are trying to make the schemes less punitive when things do go wrong. Currently, if you're inspected and there are problems with the agreement, you stand both to have payments recovered and to have really quite substantial penalties imposed on top of that. What we're doing from this year for agreements starting from 2021 onwards is there will no longer be any penalties imposed over and above the recovery of payments. So first of all, there will be loss of penalty, but also the intention is going to be far more to work with farmers to try to actually correct mistakes and get things working, rather more than to sort of reach for the rule book and begin penalising straight away. As part of simplification, a number of the mid-tier revenue options have also been rewritten for countryside stewardship, and with the aim to make them simpler, more outcome focused, and with fewer mandatory prescriptions. So it's going to be much more about agreeing with you what the outcome is we're trying to achieve, and giving you more flexibility as to how you then go about achieving that on your farms, and also to have fewer intermediate points where you could go wrong and trip yourself up and then be found out on inspection. So the aim is, as I say, to just simplify that. Few other changes taking place. We've removed greening as part of the basic payment scheme. That has a knock-on effect for CS in that it simplifies the citing of some of the options that you might be using for CS, because you don't have to worry about having CS options cited on top of areas that you were already putting into your ecological, counting towards your ecological focus area for BPS. The upland offer has been expanded in a number of areas. The eligibility for the option for management of upland grazing birds has been increased, and we've also substantially increased the payment rates for some of the upland wood pasture options available under CS. Probably happened too late to have much impact immediately this year, but it's something I think which could be of significant benefit going forward. Final point to make on that slide, just as I've said, we can deliver those benefits and those simplifications for new agreements taking place under or that are running under national regulation. If you have an agreement which predates 2021, unfortunately that will have to continue under the existing EU rules because it's a multi-annual contract that's already been entered into, with direct funding from the EU. Next slide, please. Thank you. We have sort of significantly revamped the capital offer under countryside stewardship. The first change to note is that CS mid-tier agreements can no longer be capital only. You will have to have a sort of balanced portfolio of capital and revenue items in your agreement going forward. Payment for capital items capped at 120,000 for air and water quality items and 50,000 for boundaries and trees and orchards. We've introduced a new 2-year CS capital grant scheme to replace the previous hedgerows and boundaries grant and water capital grants. There were previously 12 options that you could opt for under those two schemes. That's now been substantially expanded to 67 options that you've got grouped under 3 headings. And particularly air quality has been introduced as an additional objective for countryside stewardship. And there are quite a number of options, particularly that you can use to reduce or take action that would reduce ammonia emissions from your farms. There's a 60,000 payment ceiling for this 2-year grant scheme, and then with a maximum spend of 20,000 under each of those 3 headings that I just referred to. terms of constraints, you can't claim the capital payments for items that are sited on land parcels which are already in a CS agreement. The only exception to that is if you're just in a wildlife offer under CS, which wouldn't otherwise include capital items. And similarly, if you've got land which is already in an HLS agreement, you can also claim for payments or claim for capital items cited on land under your HLS agreement as well. Some items will require CSFO approval. There's if you look at the guidance for the capital scheme, that will tell you which options that are, and those options also have to be cited in high priority areas for water quality and air. Next slide, please, Anna. Thank you. Now, obviously, we've got, there's a sort of transition taking place. People call it sort of the flight path, if you like, to environmental land management. But there are people who are in quite a variety of different positions in terms of their participation in agricultural, in agri-environment schemes at the moment. Particularly with obviously people who are under current agreements under CS and ES that are coming to an end at the moment. And in terms of agreements that are coming to an end in 2021, obviously, first of all, anybody in that position has got the option just to go into an entirely new CS agreement under the national regulations. You also have the option, obviously, just to choose not to participate in any agri-environment schemes going forward, but that would hopefully not be something that anybody would be contemplating too seriously at this point. If you are in a position where you've got an HLS agreement, which is coming to an end during this year, then providing Natural England is satisfied that the objectives of your current agreement are being achieved, and it's generally in good order, you will be offered a 1-year rollover of that agreement on the current terms, so with current options and based on the current area under agreement. And we've so far sent out about 2,500 offers to people to roll over agreements in that situation. If you're in the position that you're under a CS agreement that is coming to an end this year, particularly where the revenue options are expiring by the end of December this year, rather than offering you a 1-year rollover of the existing agreement, what we'll be doing is offering you a 5-year, what we're calling mirror agreement under national regulation. And that would be basically to roll over on the basis of the same options you have in your current agreement and the same area under agreement, but switching from EU rules to national rules and with an outline with a commitment for five years. We think there are about 4,000 farmers who are going to be in that position whose agreements will have started in 2016 and 2017. And everyone who is in that position should be, if you haven't already received a letter from us, we will be contacting you very imminently to explain to you what your options are. Final point to stress under that, if you did opt to go that route and to set up a 5-year mirror agreement, then the possibility to leave that agreement early, to go into one of the new agri-environment schemes and to go into particularly, I guess, SFI or local nature recovery would be, we would offer that flexibility. So you're not bound in for the whole 5-year period if you did want to, to get into ELM from 2024 onwards. Next slide, please. Thank you. So those are the changes which you made this year. We obviously have got ambitions for future changes to CS as well, particularly to improve the digital offer to make it easier to apply to the scheme online. One quite important area is we're looking to increase the flexibility of countryside stewardship by moving to a rolling application windows and more flexible payments. So rather more than just having this sort of single application window in a fixed year, it would be possible to join the scheme at different periods during the year. And obviously, you know, that only works if we then have similar flexibility about offering you a different schedule of payments, and particularly possibility even of moving to payment in arrears on a sort of monthly basis. So that flexibility is under active consideration, and I think it is very much a case of watch this space. I mean, we are hoping to make progress on that very shortly. Also, just simplifying the claim and agreement process. You may remember, for those of you who've been involved in agri-environment schemes for a while, it used to be the case that we just took it that we had what we call deemed claim. So we just assumed that everyone who was locked into a 5-year agreement would want to claim payment every year, and we didn't insist on an active claim process. And we're looking at the possibility of going back to something more along that basis, particularly if people aren't changing any aspect of the agreement from year to year. And really, you know, that's all in the context of trying to develop a control regime which is much more clearly targeted on risk, on the very few cases where there's really active risk and fraud, and a delivery or control regime which is more proportionate, and is more clearly involved in supporting customers to deliver the environmental outcomes, which, you know, everybody has joined schemes in good faith, you know, to be able to achieve. Next slide, please. Thank you. Just to say something about the sustainable farming incentive and the transition away, a bit more about the transition away from BPS to the new schemes paying for delivery of public goods. We've already said that in 2021, the phased reduction in BPS payments was beginning. We are also expecting later on in the spring, there will be a DEFRA consultation exercise on how that payment reduction will roll out, particularly on the possibility of taking a lump sum payment as an outgoers payment rather than carrying on receiving annual payments under BPS, and also the calculation or the use of the reference amount that will be used to calculate your BPS entitlement when we delink the scheme in 2024 and remove the active link to the amount of land you farm or number of entitlements you hold. Also in 2021, just looking under the SFI column, as we've already said, the SFI pilot is well, the expressions of interest are live already, and you will be able to potentially participate in that this year as well. 2022, we have the lump sum payment outgoers scheme. SFI will be further rolled out, and we're anticipating that the opportunity to join SFI would be opened up to all BPS applicants. So that's about 85,000 farmers potentially. And also in 2022, the government will be, or DEFRA will be, carrying out further piloting of some of the other elements of environmental land management, and particularly local nature recovery and landscape recovery. Roll forward again to 2024, as you say, BPS payments are delinked at that point. So the entitlement to the payment is, or the link to having to have land or entitlements is broken. SFI will be further expanded, and at that point will be open to all farmers and qualifying land managers, and the progressive rollout of local nature recovery and landscape recovery will continue. And then further down the line, again, as you will already be aware, the current plan is that by 2028, BPS will have been completely phased out, and there will be, no more direct payments, and all support will be delivered through the payment for public goods. Next slide, please. Thank you. So SFI pilot, as I say, the expressions of interest opened actually last week. What this is it offers people the opportunity to participate in the development of sustainable farming, the sustainable farming incentive, and there will be significant learning and feedback components sort of built in to the participation in the pilot exercise. And if you were successful in applying to be part of the pilot, that the learning and feedback element is reflected in the fact there would be a flat rate participation fee currently envisaged at being around £5,000, as well as payment for your actual pilot agreement, which would be based on eight standards, each with 3 different levels attached to them: intermediate or introductory, intermediate or advanced. It is going to be a relatively small pilot. I mean, we're looking at probably either side of 1,000 farmers being part of it, and the aim is to have a spread of location and farm types. You know, within that sample, people would have to be BPS applicants to be able to join the pilot, and all the kind of normal considerations about having to show you've got management control of the land for the duration of the agreement would apply as well. The land parcels which are entered into the pilot, obviously they have to be situated entirely within England, and also not part of an existing agri-environment agreement, and that's really so we can avoid any potential double funding of activities which are already being undertaken on people's farms. The timeline for the pilot, we've already said, the expressions of interest opened online last week. It's a very simple process. If you're already registered to use rural payments, it's literally a tick box exercise and answering 2 or 3 questions. The expressions of interest will be open until the 11th of April. We will then obviously review those, and offers will be made, and the application process will be gone through during midsummer, sort of from June onwards. And then the intention is that the pilot agreements would start from October onwards and run until late 2024, with payments being made in arrears. Next slide, please. Thank you. I won't run through that, but just to say those are the 8 standards that will be or standards that will be available as options under the pilot scheme with the associated payment rates. Thank you. And then finally, just a reminder of timings for the schemes. I won't go into a lot of detail there, but hopefully if you get an opportunity to share the slide deck at the end of the meeting. This to give you a reference going forward. If you're making an annual claim for your CS agreement, the application or the window to do that opened on the 18th of March and will run until the 17th of May this year. That's because the 15th of May falls on a weekend. The application window for higher tier CS opened on the 9th of February, similarly with mid-tier. Higher tier runs until the 30th of April. For mid-tier, you've got until the 30th of July to apply. And then you've got the associated application windows for capital items as well. Thank you, Chairman. I'll stop there and allow you to move on.
Thanks, Simon. That's great. Really useful. A lot of information there. The slides will be made available. So we will be sending everything out, including a recording of this at the end to all participants. There are lots of questions coming in about CS and SFI. We'll try and pick some of those up in the Q&A session that Simon will take part in. But I'm now really pleased to introduce a section where farmers that are already actively involved in countryside stewardship and other aspects of agri-environment are going to share some of their thoughts about it. And I'd like to start first with Andrea Meanwell. So Andrea, you can unmute yourself and open your camera. Andrea, you farm upland beef and sheep, and your farm spans the Lake District and the Yorkshire Dales border. And you also, I understand, have worked for a national park, but you'll introduce yourself. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you very much. Sorry, can you see the slides all right, Richard?
Yep, lovely. They're really good.
Thank you. Yes, as Richard said, my farm is in both the Yorkshire Dales National Park and the Lake District National Park. And I'm just going to speak this afternoon about how I've used countryside stewardship to work on my upland farm. So first of all, I'll give a quick introduction to the farm and the farming business. Then I'll talk about countryside stewardship and why we wanted to join, the agreements that we've got, options that have worked well for me, and lessons that I've learned on my farm. So just a quick introduction to the farm. It's a typical upland hill farm. We farm rough fell sheep here, and I also have some rare breed sheep. We had a suckler herd of cattle, but we're gradually swapping that over time into rearing dairy calves because the suckler herd wasn't actually making any money. We've got 172 acres of in-by land that we own. That's in the Yorkshire Dales National Park. And then we've got 135 acres that we rent that is on the other side of the motorway in the Lake District National Park. And the key wildlife species that we've got are red squirrels, otters, and the small pearl-bordered fritillary butterfly. We've got quite a diverse farming business. We're a family partnership between myself and my son. Most of our lamb now is sold direct to dumb buyer, and the beef is sold store at auction. We've got a small knitwear brand that we sell online through the portal Etsy. I also get an income from writing. I've written 5 books in the last 5 years, and I'm a Guardian columnist and columnist for Cumbria magazine and some other magazines. So we get a small income from that. Last summer, we set up a pop-up campsite, and we're intending to do that again. We have a holiday cottage, and we breed dogs, and I have a job as the farming officer for the Lake District National Park Authority. So we've got a really diverse range of incomes. Hopefully, if one thing goes disastrously wrong during the year, then we've still got other things that can help keep the business viable and sustainable. So why did we want to go into countryside stewardship? Well, obviously we wanted to get the revenue payment, so we were interested in the annual payments that we get, but we were also very interested in the capital payments because we wanted to really improve the infrastructure of the farm to enable us to do more rotational grazing and to build soils. A key motivation, which I'll talk about a bit later, was also to make the farm safer, because we've had a couple of serious quad bike accidents in the past 2 years. So there were areas that I wanted to remove from the sheep and from the cows so that we didn't have to go in there on quad bikes. I wanted to make the habitats there better for wildlife and create a more joined up habitat for the otters and the squirrels. And I've designed a 3.5 mile nature recovery network because we've got a very long, thin farm. And I also wanted to make the landscape more resilient because we've had several serious flood events such as Storm Desmond in Cumbria, and we've had some areas of riverbank which have been taken out in storm events, and I wanted to try and prevent that as well. So what schemes do we have on our farm? I've got 2 mid-tier agreements. I did one year, and then I didn't have time to get all of the land into it for various complicated reasons. So I did the second half the second year. So I've got 2 mid-tier agreements which run one after the other. We've got a higher tier agreement on the rented land, but that is the landowner's higher tier agreement, so we don't benefit from that. We've got a woodland management plan. We've got some of our woodlands in a higher tier woodlands agreement. And we've also got a tree planting agreement with the Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust. I looked at the Forestry Commission scheme, but it was very complicated. So I chose an alternative offer from a local charity to do our tree planting with. So we've got all of those agreements working on the farm. So what revenue did we get? Well, from those 2 mid-tier agreements, we get £7,000 per annum as a revenue payment. That's for the wildlife habitats that we've excluded. And we've also got £70,000 over 3 years, because of course the 2 agreements are running one after the other for capital works that we wanted to do on the farm. I got £1,000 to write the woodland management plan. We got £5,000 in woodland capital grants to fence off some areas of ancient woodland. So all in all, on those 172 acres that we own, over 6 years, we've got £111,000 of income from countryside stewardship. So I'm just going to have a very quick look at some options that have worked really well for us on our farm. One option that's worked well is SW11 riparian strip management, which pays £440 a hectare for areas that are taken out of agricultural production next to a ditch, a river or a stream. You can graze it once every 5 years if you want to. And the scheme pays for fencing, FG1, that option is at £4 a metre, for gates and for water gates, etc. Now, the main reason for doing this was, in addition to providing the habitats, was to stop animals coming across from off the common onto our land. We wanted to make our farm a lot better for biosecurity, because our own animals were escaping across from when the river was low, they were escaping across onto the Howgill Fells, and also other animals were coming in, other people's animals. So that was our main motivation for doing it. As you can see in the top picture, when we bought the farm, the river was just open, and in the bottom picture is where we fenced it off. So it's a lot better for us for our biosecurity, and we've funded 3.5 kilometres of fencing and gates through this scheme. The other option that's worked really well is GS1, taking small areas out of management. So that pays £365 a hectare, and you can have a whole series of areas that are up to ½ a hectare. You can graze them or cut them 1 year out of every 5 if you want to. And what I've done with this is really split up fields for rotational grazing with wildlife areas in between. So I've managed to get the funding for the fencing to split up the fields by putting wildlife areas in between. And most of these wildlife areas are really dangerous areas that I wanted to exclude. So if you look in the bottom picture, just to the right of the river, it's difficult to see, but there's a whole series of gullies in there. They look like brown stripes coming down the hillside. They're gullies which were really dangerous for us to go into gathering sheep on quad bikes. So with me transferring the business over from myself to my son, I didn't want him as a young person going around in dangerous areas on his own while I was doing my other job. So I fenced off any area that I considered to be dangerous and created that as a wildlife area. And I've also added in extra sheep pens for animal welfare. And we've found that there's been a real improvement. In that top picture, along the sides of the river, basically it's all open, and it was very difficult to move animals from one area to another. But stock can now be moved regularly just with one person. So as well as helping the wildlife, it's making the farm more productive in itself. It's better for the stock, it's better for the soils, we'll be using less fertiliser. The landscape will be more resilient because the edges of the river are not being nibbled. There'll be better habitats there for the otters and for the butterflies. It'll be safer for us because my son won't be driving in dangerous areas. And we've had 60% of the capital cost to split up this long, thin area funded by countryside stewardship. And the rest of the money that it's cost us will be repaid by the revenue payments over the 5 years or the 6 years. So it's cost about £70,000 to do all of this infrastructure, and out of a total possible income of £111,000 that we'll get from countryside stewardship. So this is just a quick diagram to show how these options work together. So we've got the railway at the top of the farm and the river loon at the bottom, and essentially about 3.5 miles of long thin strip like this. So I fenced off the riverbank in that long riparian strip option, and then unsafe areas have been put into the GS1 option, or anything that is a culvert, or, you know, a difficult area, or an area where there's a good habitat for the butterflies, they've gone into GS1. And then areas that I've wanted to put other infrastructure in, I've put, for example, on that left-hand side, a shelter belt, which I've funded with charity funding. And then you can see at the top, I've added in sheep pens into each area. So the whole thing now is much easier for us to manage, and hopefully will be much more productive. So what hasn't worked well? It's been quite challenging with cash flow, because, for example, some of the fencing, one of the months was £42,000 when the contractor was doing it. So I had to ask him if it was okay if he could bill it in two separate bills. So I paid one, and then I waited for the money to be paid back, and then I paid the second half. So, you know, it has been challenging for us with cash flow. Some of the claims have been held up because, I mean, you can appreciate I've got a lot of things like gates that I have to send photos of. I think one claim had 16 different gates, and one of the gates wasn't labelled correctly, so that held the claim up. So sometimes claims have been held up, and that's been quite tricky for us. I did also choose some unsuitable options, because mid-tier you have to design yourself, and I put in some pumps, ram pumps, which were unsuitable for that ground. And it's a bit frustrating, because with a 5-minute conversation with a Natural England advisor after I'd put the scheme in, he told me that I should have put the pasture pump option. You know, if I'd have had availability to that advice at the time, I would have chosen the correct option. So I did choose some things that were inappropriate, because I had to design the scheme myself without the advice. I found the woodland application really difficult. We got paid £1,000 for writing the woodland management plan, but most of the things I had to write were kind of outside of my experience. For example, the volume of timber removed, you know, as a square metre measurement. I hadn't ever had to do anything like that before. So that was really tricky, and that's why I've moved from the Forestry Commission agreements to just doing the agreements with our local charity now, because I found that much simpler. And there were challenges in that some habitats were not mapped. For example, our ancient woodland, which the Woodland Trust agreed was ancient woodland, and we could see ourselves was ancient woodland, wasn't mapped as such. So I couldn't put a particular option on that. So that was a bit frustrating. And the reason that it wasn't mapped is because the previous owner hadn't been in schemes. So things that were really good habitats were not showing up online, which was disappointing. I hope that's been useful, just as an illustration of one farm and the way that we've used countryside stewardship. So thanks very much for listening.
Andrea, thank you. That was really useful, very practical, and you've clearly thought this through so well. So that was great. And I hope that's given some of our participants today some real ideas and some real pointers to where to go next. I now have pleasure inviting Fraser Hugill to speak about his experiences of using countryside stewardship and similar schemes. Fraser spent a lifetime farming in protected landscapes. He was born on a tented farm in the North York Moors, and has recently moved into the Howardian Hills from a national park into an AONB. You've got a huge amount of farming experience, Fraser, and we look forward to hear some of your anecdotes and thoughts about countryside stewardship now.
Thanks, Richard. Hopefully the technology is working there. So yes, thanks for that introduction, Richard. I realise we're up against time, so I'll kind of try and keep to my 10 minutes. As Richard said, I've had a lifetime farming and working in protected landscapes, farming all my life, first in the North York Moors and then now in the Howardian Hills, the AONB. Should also point out that I spent 13 years of my working career working at North York Moors National Park, so there's a few familiar names on this call, working with them down the years. So I'm going to set out a bit like Andrea has, really, in terms of how we're using public funding to move to a life without BPS. I'm sure it's what all the farmers I'm talking about are thinking about, how do we do it, how do we get there, what does it look like, but we've got lots of uncertainty at the moment. Hang on, my slides are not moving. That is not good. Can you just help us? Ah, there we go. Phew. Being in farmer mode, I was thinking a bit of band or won't fix that, or it will revert to the hammer. So anyway, it's working now. So a bit of an overview of our farm and our farm business. Very much a family farm. Not unlike a lot of farms now, we're split into different lumps and we have different land tenure, a bit like Andrea's just mentioned on her farm. So our home, as it were, is the 177 acres at Throstlenest in the Hoardian Hills AONB. We moved there from our upland farm in 2012. I took over the management of my dad's 145 acres of well, primarily arable land, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. In 2010, that sort of coincided with leaving the North York Moors National Park Authority and taking on the farm business. And I also rent a little bit of land next door to me at Throstlenest, so that makes up the overall farm business. Just a bit more of an overview continued. We run 50 pedigree beef shorthorn cows. Bit of a passion in terms of the suckler cows. I realised pulling this together that most pictures of the farm seem to have a shorthorn in them somewhere. So we run those. We take all the heifers through to breeding as breeding heifers and sell them through pedigree sales. And all our steers now go into Morrison's, into the dedicated beef shorthorn scheme, and we're finishing those as well as a mixed farm. Tend to do all operations in-house where I can. The only exceptions to that are the ram baling and the spraying, which is contracted out. And in terms of labour on the farm, that's myself and my partner, along with a self-employed part-time worker who does two days a week. And also a big part of my income, as it were, is off-farm consultancy. I've still retained that. I would say it was an ambition to get rid of that at some point, but things seem to happen and I actually quite enjoy it. So in terms of what I do, I do the championing the farmed environment across the north of England when the contract slides to that, which isn't at the moment, unfortunately. I also run a countryside stewardship facilitation fund up in the Esk Valley of the North York Moors, and I think we've got a few members on the call today. And more recently, I've been working with the local AONB, delivering the farming in protected landscapes funding, looking at stewardship, etc., within our own protected landscape here, which has been really interesting and good to get out and meet people locally. A bit of overview there. I think whenever we're talking about farms and farm businesses, and when we go up the drive, we've got to think of those farm objectives, and I'm just the same. Well, the one at the top was a bit of humour there, but obviously it's the first rule of farming: do not go bust, or any business whatsoever. So we've always got to think about the money and the finances. But it's much more than that, isn't it? Yeah, if we just talk economics and farm businesses, well, I would question why I was actually a farmer. We've got to think of other things. What do we do? Thinking about this the other night, control over land management. You know, why don't I contract things out in terms of meeting my objectives? I do like that element of control. I've got a picture of the combine on there. I do like that. I think I get more stressed waiting for a contractor than I do getting on the combine and doing it myself. And that's important to have that control. But also keeping control, and I think that's significant over finance. I don't want to get to the day where the bank manager's telling me what to do. I want control over future management as well. And if I'm not in that position, then I need to do something about it. Your farm and it is the place you live. And when we talk about public goods, it shouldn't be lost that the person that experiences those public goods the most is yourself. And that is very important to me, alongside those environmental values. And they sit very, very high on my list of things, much like George said in his introduction to the video right at the start of this event. I need the farm to complement my consultancy work in terms of sort of practicing what I preach and actually enjoying what I do. And I think that's really important. Like I say, it is a family farm, and some of them photos, I think, get that message across. So into the guts of really what I'm here to talk about, and that is this transition to the BPS-free world, really. How are we going to do that? And I think a lot of us woke up on 24th of June, whatever year it was, after the referendum, and I woke up that morning and said, right, there's my BPS gone. I've started planning from that day, because we knew what was going to happen. Without getting political, we knew who was in power, and it was very obvious that would go. You only have to follow what the Brexiteers had said, and we knew that was going to happen. So on White House, in many ways, as the title of this says, it is BPS free already. I farm the land, I farm it BPS free. Dad takes still claims BPS, he still claims he takes some stewardship revenue payment, that is in effect his rent. So I've got to earn my living off actually farming the land. That's the theory. So it's in stewardship mid-tier, it has been for the last, since 2015. But I get access to the capital payments to change how I farm, and that was really the key thing to highlight here. And what stewardship has helped me do is implement livestock back onto that farm business to deal with some of the issues there, and it's been really valuable for that. It's extended our rotation. It's got rid of oilseed rape out of the rotation by adding in 2 years of grass or a simple hurdle layers I use on that farm, by trying to get the farm stock through. I've highlighted what the stewardship payment is there, and then that will become relevant later on in the presentation. But it's taking about 5% of the land is into stewardship mid-tier for that payment. And as I've highlighted, capital options, again, similar to Andrea, have been really critical. I couldn't have transitioned that farm to a mixed farm without those stewardship payments helping me put the infrastructure in place. We've got a new agreement starting in 2021. That's going to take it to the next level, really, in terms of starting to deal with manures. Muck storage will hopefully be going in there, sorting out the farmyard. An arable farmyard, once it becomes a livestock farmyard, gets a much messier place. So that's going to be really helpful in terms of getting that infrastructure in place. But I've also had to put a lot of my own money in terms of in a cattle building. We've got a new straw shed going up because I don't want to be accessing the land in the winter. And I should highlight, we've worked really closely with catchment sensitive farming, but also our local Rivers Trust. Tees Rivers Trust has done a lot of work with them over the years, looking at soil health, and we just had a CS soil health check done, because actually that's been one of our key challenges, but key sort of opportunities as well, is improving soil health on a lowland farm. And that's really what a lot of my sort of future direction is built around, hopefully improving soil health, improving productivity across the farm rotation. I recognise we had a lot of problems when I took over in 2010. I thought I could fix it out with a bag and a spray tin, because that's what we've all been brought up on. It became pretty obvious over the next few years that wasn't the solution, and that wasn't going to fix the problem. I was spending more money and getting, to be honest, very similar yields to Dad was getting 20 years ago. So it's something much more fundamental that we have to address. So this is all well and good, sort of doing that, moving to a mixed farm, but we shouldn't do it with rose-tinted spectacles. At the end of the day, we've got to balance costs. And one of the things I'm very aware of is this real challenge of balancing fixed costs as I move to a mixed farming system. I've got more infrastructure, I've got less arable area to spread those costs around. It's really trying to consider that within my decision making. I've got a real challenge going forward here in terms of disconnect between payment and farming. I'm probably very fortunate that the landlord is my dad, and we sort of touch on it of what's going to happen with BPS. He's given me a bit of confidence that he won't do what he could, but I think it's something we really need to highlight, because in reality, the land isn't BPS free. It is paying a return for my dad. I'm probably fortunate he's done a lot of diversification. He perhaps doesn't need that rent, but if he did, if he was paying for his pension, then that would be a challenge moving forward, because we could capture the BPS payment, but it would have quite a big impact on my farming system. And I've just highlighted succession and timescales around that. I could talk about that for a while, but I'm aware of time. So that's White House, like I say, very much, like I said, from my point of view, BPS free, but it's not, and I really wanted to highlight that in terms of thinking about tenancy arrangements, how that's going to work with FBTs in the future. And I think there's some real challenges around that I don't think have been discussed enough. But let's move to home. Crossell Nest, absolutely fantastic place to live. Absolutely love the place. but it is a really challenging place to farm. It's a heavy clay soil, impermeable, very wet, average field size, as it says there, 8.4 acres. Fantastic hedgerow network, brilliant wildlife. A lot of the pictures that you'll see on the bottom of the screen there, they're all taken here. It suits stewardship down to the ground, really. So the figures you've got up on your screen there are my real figures. So 2020, you can see the BPS payment there, just over 15,000, and our countryside stewardship that expires at the end of 2020, we were claiming about 3,000, and that was a higher tier countryside stewardship. Reasonable amount of stuff in there, reasonably ambitious, but quite a small payment. So last summer, it was a sit down and think, right, how do we embrace stewardship more? How do we really do what's right for this farm and our farm system? So in 2021, you can see there's a new countryside stewardship payment coming online, and you can see the bottom lines of what's happening. So basically, through to 2024, I'm maintaining my income from the public purse, as it were. But in 2024, you can see we're starting to drop off, and then in 2025, we don't really know what's going to happen. We might have some BPS, we might not, but I do know up until that point, I've got countryside stewardship, and perhaps everything will be fine at that point because I'll have elms, and that'll solve all my worries. But we'll wait and see on that. But I've basically secured my payment through to that point, and you can see I've put an average on there as well. But let's not kid ourselves. Life is never that simple. So this is what we've had to do to get that CS payment. They're all my options with the figures of what I'm getting. The thing I really want to point out there, I'm used to using a little red pointer now from standing in front of you all in a pub, but is look out for that 41.9% of land. I've had to put a significant amount of the farm in to recapture that payment, and that's something that I'm very aware of when we move forward to elms in terms of what are we actually going to have to do. You know, we can recapture the payment. What does that mean? How do we do it? What I will point out, of being more positive though, is that if you look at some of those options, there's some big areas of grassland options that don't mean that I'm stopping farming that bit of land. For winter bird food, yeah, you can say I've got no agricultural production on that, but a lot of them other options, they're still farmed options. So I'm just going to keep rolling on through that. Hopefully you've all took those figures in. But of course, it's still more complex still, because ultimately some of those options have costs. They take time. We've got to buy the seed. We've got supplementary feeding options, and of course the stress and the hassle of dealing with the agreement. And those, what in technical terms are called transaction costs, so paperwork, etc. So we could talk about that for a long time, but we won't. Also, there's the risk element of compliance and establishment of options. And Simon touched on it already. It was quite a big relief, actually, to see the statement. I think it's the biggest change to stewardship this year is actually the new approach. It gives me a lot more confidence going into a stewardship agreement, seeing that, and advising farmers to go into a stewardship agreement. But ultimately, stewardship's only part of the story. It's about looking at those costs, looking at how the farm system works, looking at how our farm system evolves over the next 5 years and how stewardship can help that. You know, can we use stewardship options to extend our grazing season, implement more rotational grazing systems, reduce winter a little bit? We'll never get to the point, I believe, that we can keep cattle out all winter. Our land just isn't suited for it, but can we make it shorter? But ultimately, it does fit with my farm objectives. And I've put a little, again, a bit of humour there, depending on whether I'm in extreme farmer mode or in extreme conservationist mode. And I do have a little internal battle sometimes over that in terms of what I do and how I farm. So the future, payment for public goods, that is what we're going to see, but we need to know what that looks like. How do I make more out of my marketing opportunities? We're utilising, we're selling breeding stock. How will that look in the future? You know, if farming goes into a depression, I believe breeding stock will be one of the things that gets hit first. but also what are the opportunities? I'm selling into a supermarket, is there other opportunities, etc. I can see Richard's popped up, so I'm going over time. Maximising input efficiency, challenging costs. We've just used the Future Farm Resilience Fund pilot to do that with Ricardo and Anderson's. That's been really valuable. Staying flexible and open to new and old ideas. So take-home messages. CS is much more than an annual payment. It's considering a systems change. Do what works for you. What Andrea, what I've said, what Simon said, none of us have a magic bullet. It's about every farm business is different. What works for you, what works for your objectives. And the one thing I'm certain on is that there will be a lot of uncertainty over the next few years, and it will be challenging. But as farmers, we're used to challenge. Something usually goes wrong. So I would suggest we're well prepared to deal with it. Thank you.
Fraser, thanks ever so much. That was really good. If you stay on, keep your camera on, keep your mic on, and if I could invite the rest of the panel, Sarah, Simon, Andrea, to turn on their cameras and their microphone. They're being joined by Helen Keep, Senior Farm Conservation Officer from the Yorkshire Dales National Park, and by Suzanne Fletcher, Head of Landscape for the Peak District National Park. They are your panel. The questions will be managed by myself and Tom Munro from Dorset A1B and Adrian Shepherd from the Yorkshire Dales National Park. The first question I've got is probably for you, Sarah, and it's a technical one around terminology. Early on, there are a lot of questions about what is 30 by 30.
Okay, so it is a government commitment to deliver by 2030 to have 30% of the land across the UK protected to meet key targets for nature. Those targets haven't been set yet, but they will be soon. And so it's just recognising that the protected landscapes, which make up 26% of that 30% in England, will play a key role in that.
Okay, could I ask Adrian if he's got a question?
Yes, thanks, Richard. I'll ask the next question. It's about access. So I guess it's partly to Sarah again. Access to the countryside is a core part of AONBs and much talked about with regard to ELMS. But I don't see much in the existing countryside stewardship options or the recently announced SFI that would promote access or compensate help farmers and landowners. So again, partly for Sarah, partly for Simon and any other panelists. Thank you.
So from my perspective, this is one of the reasons why we've brought in the Farming and Protected Landscape Fund, because access is so important. And so that is to help to bridge the gap to ELM. I don't know if there's anyone on the call who can answer the ELM part, that over the next 3 years, there will be funding available to undertake access activities.
Okay, Tom, do you want to come in with a question?
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, there are a few questions about the transition between environmental stewardship and environmental stewardship that ends in 2023. So there's a number of people with agreements that carry on that far. And the question is, are there any areas of CS that they will be able to apply for?
I'll answer that if that's okay. So in terms of somebody still being in a countryside stewardship agreement or an ELS-HLS agreement, I think the question was about, wasn't it? They can only apply for the capital grant at the moment. And if they were thinking of coming out early, just to go into, say, mid-tier or higher tier, then they would probably expect some penalties to do that instead. So I would advise just staying in their existing agreement and applying for the capital grant if they need to.
Okay, I have a question around support for organic farming systems, probably one for you, Simon. What support is there for organic farming in the new countryside stewardship, if any?
Well, I think there are there are options. I mean, in terms of the SFI pilot, it's obviously not part of this stage of the pilot. I mean, whether there will be, I mean, part of the way this is being done is it's being rolled out through a series of iterations. So there will be further pilots and further tests and trials as well to help build the the scheme in its final form. And what I don't know is whether there'll be more organic, there'll be possibility for organic options in the future.
Thanks, Simon. Back to Adrian.
Yeah, thank you. There's a number of questions about triple SI condition, particularly only 26% of SSIs within national parks are in favourable condition compared with 43.5% outside national parks. How will the new scheme address this? And until the changes, how will that impact on the 30 target? So I don't know which panelist wants to take that one.
I can take part of it. I think that this is really for you to work out with your protected landscape representatives. One of the reasons with the Farming and Protected Landscape programme, that one of the key things is that we've said that you know best. You know your land and you know what is needed to improve the conditions of those particular triple SIs that you're responsible for. And so it's about working closely with the protected landscape representatives, who will be working closely with DEFRA to look at the targets that we want to achieve to meet those 30 by 30 commitments, and then putting in place the necessary programs of work or projects to help to deliver it. Is that enough, Adrian?
Adrian, if I could just add to what Sarah said, it's just really an observation, but I think that a large part of those statistics is the moorland SSI, which much of it is now still in unfavourable recovering because of the ongoing work. And one of the farmers on a recent workshop that I was involved with here in the Peak District said, well, so, it's taken hundreds of years to get like that for various reasons, including all the industrial pollution. It's going to take hundreds of years probably to get it back to where it should be. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah and Sue. And Tom.
Okay.
Thank you. So there's a question about the protected landscapes having experienced a much higher visitor pressure during the pandemic, and it's welcome that farming and protected landscapes will be able to deal with some of those issues. The question is actually about the countryside code. So Natural England were reviewing the countryside code. Can the panel give an update on that?
I think that I'll have to take this one as well. Sorry. So the countryside code is being relaunched this week, and in time for the lockdown lifting on the 28th. And so you should be hearing some news stories about it, although it depends on how much is picked up by the media. But we have undertaken a campaign to try and raise awareness, and there will be a further campaign over the summer to raise awareness as well.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. I've got one for Fraser and Andrea. Somebody has asked, do you spend all your life filling in forms, or do you ever get out on the farm?
Well, yes, I do get. Go on, Fraser, you go first.
Well, believe me, I do get out on the farm. I sometimes feel like I'm filling forms quite a lot, but particularly other people's forms, that's even better. At least you're getting paid for that. But yeah, we do, isn't it? It is a challenge in terms of filling out forms and paperwork. I think my issue often isn't the amount of time it takes to fill in the forms. I think it's the fear of getting them wrong. And I think I did say in my presentation, one of the biggest changes when I sat down the night the new countryside stewardship guidance came out was the whole tone changing. I think you covered that, Simon, in your presentation as well. And that's more significant to me than the time that actually it takes to fill in the forms. I spend more time checking my BPS form than I do actually filling it in. And I think that's quite a fundamental change with countryside stewardship.
Thank you, Fraser. Andrea, do you want to add anything?
Well, I was going to say, yes, I get out on the farm very early in the morning before the day job starts. But, well, I've sort of developed a policy with my form filling in that when I think it's good enough, I send it in. And then if it's not good enough, somebody will come back and will usually offer you help. So that's my strategy, in that I send things in when I think they're okay. I try not to worry too much about them. And then if I have made a mistake, it's not game over. You know, somebody will give me a phone call and say, you haven't ticked this box or whatever. And you do get that ongoing support. So you don't get support from Natural England to design your scheme with mid-tier. But if you've done anything wrong on the form filling inside, they will definitely come back and help you, because I've had that, you know, on several occasions.
Okay, Adrian.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. I've got a question. It's about the Farmer Facilitation Fund groups. With recent changes to the administration of those groups, it's been said, and I've got some experience of this personally in another role, that it's much more difficult to put the claims in and justify the claims to get the money out. And obviously, looking forward, farming clusters are a really important way that we can get money into the farms and inform them about the transition. So I guess the question is directed initially to Simon, but there may be others want to contribute to this. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm afraid on that one, I'll have to take the question away. I'm not directly involved in the farmer facilitation funds, but if there are, I mean, if we are creating more obstacles to making those work, then you know, yeah, I mean, that's something we should definitely look at, because the whole aim and slightly going back to the previous question is to actually simplify things and strip away bureaucracy where it's not needed. But bearing in mind, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, we're no longer being policed by Europe, but it's still public money, and we therefore still have to be very, very careful to be able to justify that we are, you know, it's being spent to achieve the objectives that were intended. So we're always going to have to make that balance. We'll achieve that balance.
Thank you, Simon. That's a great answer. And anybody else want to contribute to that? Fraser might have something, as he manages to say like I do.
I hear that with trepidation as a facilitator that's about to be moved onto the new system. I've got to say, so I might be all of a sudden relating back to that previous question. But one thing I would say, and it's perhaps me brown nosing up to the RPA, is that I've got a very good person within the RPA that is very helpful when I ring in, and I think, but the point behind that is that we need to become much more people orientated in terms of having that direct contact and that same person that deals with me each time. So I think, again, let's take that as a lesson that farmers should have a point of contact in the future, because that's what really life's about, is about people.
And certainly part of what we're trying to do is to change the kind of role and ethos of our inspection process, because by and large, you know, inspectors are people who, you know, they have got muddy boots. They often come from the farming community, and they would be much rather engaged in trying to be helping people than necessarily, you know, than acting as policemen in situations where there isn't. You know, if you talk to inspectors, they will tell you very quickly. They get a feel very early on in the visit whether there's anything wrong or not. You know, and they would much rather be helping people and kind of mentoring and coaching rather than necessarily catching people out.
Thank you,
Thank you, Simon and Fraser. Happy to move on to Tom.
Thanks. There's a cluster of questions about soil. So if I ask a couple of direct questions of Fraser and one of Simon to consider while Fraser's answering, perhaps. So Fraser, have you done a carbon audit? Do you do soil testing to see if it changes? And Simon, are you able to say anything about any incentives available through ELM for soil restoration?
So yeah, carbon audits, I've got to say that comes into that, trying to avoid doing lots of paperwork. We've started going through the process. I've got to say I've got a little bit disheartened doing a carbon audit myself, in terms of I don't feel it takes account of some of the ones we use, didn't feel it take account of some of the things we're doing, like all the woodland we've got, the amounts of hedges we've got on the farm. It seemed very basic to me. In terms of soil health, yes, we are. We do take up. We've started taking organic matter tests. We did that back. I think the first ones we did back in 2017. We've just done a number of soil health checks, some through catchment sensitive farming, which is really useful. And we've just paid for some ourselves through our agronomy firm as well, looking at the biological activity in the soil to see where we are and have a baseline. So yeah, it is something we're very, very keen to do and keen to do more of.
Thank you. And Simon.
Well, just to say, in terms of the SFI pilot, which is the kind of first rollout of Elm, that has got standards for improving soil in arable land and grassland. So yeah, so it will it's clearly going to feature quite prominently, and it's obviously a key objective for agri-environment schemes generally. So I think that they will feature quite strongly in ELM going forward.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Simon. I'm very conscious that we will need to end on time because you're all busy and you've got other things to do. I'm going to ask one last question about projects that need collaboration and cooperation across land holdings. Is there anything that can facilitate? Can you have schemes that are multi-landowner schemes?
I think once you there are obviously the various elements of Elm going forward. I think the idea is SFI is that something a sort of self-contained scheme that an individual farmer could apply to. Once you get on to local nature recovery and landscape recovery, then clearly cooperating across farms and across landscapes is really the the whole raison d'etre behind them. So I think collaboration is going to be absolutely key going forward.
Okay, thank you, Simon. As I say, we have captured all the questions. We will divvy them up and feed them on to people that might be able to answer them, and hopefully be able to bring together some sort of digest of what was asked and what the answers were in the next few weeks, I would imagine. I'd like to close the meeting now and thank the panelists for their contributions and invite them to turn off their cameras and mute themselves, and thank them once again. My final words are AONBs and national parks, the teams working within them, will continue to provide information to farmers and land managers and work closely with you over the coming months and years. There are other sources of information, and you'll see some of them on the screen now, and you will be sent information about today's webinar that will help you access those. In particular, Natural England are running free workshops and one-to-one advice sessions, and the link is there on the screen now. The National Association will collate information on our website, so you'll get a link to that website after this webinar, but we will try and put as much useful information, documents, PowerPoint presentations as we can onto that website for you to download. You will receive a link to this recording of today's session. Now, if you know people that wanted to be at this session and couldn't for one or other reason, we know that we had extended our Zoom license up to 3,000 last night, but it would seem that it hadn't taken effect and we could only let just over 500 into the event. So we will review whether we run this event again. As you leave this webinar, you will be asked to complete a short survey. This survey is to give us information about how we help you in the future, running more events, running tailored events, whatever. As with any survey, when you ask 500 people to fill in a survey, there are going to be questions that don't relate to you, you don't recognize the answers, you can't answer. Please bear with it and provide us with as much information as possible, and don't get too frustrated about filling in the survey. it's there to help us help you. Finally, I'd like to say this workshop would not have been possible without contributions from staff in national parks, in AONBs, with colleagues from DEFRA and the RPA, and from the farming sector. I'd like to say many thanks to Fraser and Andrea for those really good practical examples of you using countryside stewardship to support your farm business and also improve the immediate environment your farm is in. Anyway, that's the end of the webinar. I'd like to say thank you to everyone. I'd also like to say thank you as participants for giving up an hour and a half and listening in, and watch this space as we will be running future webinars, we hope. Bye-bye.